affecting farming, it's affecting wildlife habitats. One of the things that we definitely see an impact on is, of course, our rivers, very dependent on water. And we see the Environment Agency monitoring water levels. So we know that around 80% of England's rivers are below normal levels at the moment, below what we'd normally see at this time of year.
The front page of the Times has a very vivid picture on it of the scorched earth around Blackheath in southeast London. More than half of England is now officially in drought, according to the Environment Agency, with 7 water companies imposing temporary use bans affecting 23 million customers. Under these conditions, the Met Office has warned that fires could become more severe, with most of England on high alert for wildfires, and we've already seen some of them. I'm joined now by Ali Morse, who is Water Policy Manager at the Wildlife Trusts. Good evening to you, Ali.
Good evening, Carole.
What effect is the droughts across the country having on the trusts that you run?
Yeah, well, as you said, we've had drought declared across around half of England, and most of the rest of the country is in what we call prolonged dry weather. And it's quite interesting to think about those definitions. I think we sort of inherently know what drought and dry weather are, but these are specific definitions that the Environment Agency and the water companies use to sort of manage our response to drought. And that prolonged dry weather is a lack of rainfall, and then drought is when we start to see the actual effects of that on water availability. So that can be affecting agriculture, such as insufficient water available for crop production, for irrigation. It can be an environmental drought affecting natural habitats and wildlife, or it can be a water supply drought, which is where we see concerns about water companies not being able to maintain supplies to their customers. And quite often we see those types of droughts occurring in combination. So given that we're in drought in much of the country now, that's because we are actually starting to see those effects, those detrimental impacts of this dry weather. And what we're seeing on nature reserves across the country is just really, really dry conditions. So we're seeing the vegetation really drying out, really sort of brown and crispy. We're seeing really hard ground conditions. We're seeing water bodies drying out. So we see ponds.
And does that have a wider effect on how, for example, the agricultural land, the crops that are grown and so on?
Yeah, it's got a huge impact right across the landscape. So one of the things that we know that our climate is likely to experience as climate conditions change is that we'll get hotter, drier summers and we'll get warmer, wetter winters. And of course, that's exactly what we've been having in recent years. We had a drought last year. This is the 3rd drought in 5 years. And after last year's drought, we then had a very wet winter, we had flooding, and then we very quickly flipped back to drought again. This year, we've had that really dry spring and summer, and we're not expecting any significant rainfall for the time being. And this is something that affects not just nature reserves, but as you say, the whole landscape. So it's affecting farming, it's affecting wildlife habitats. One of the things that we definitely see an impact on is, of course, our rivers, very dependent on water. And we see the Environment Agency monitoring water levels. So we know that around 80% of England's rivers are below normal levels at the moment, below what we'd normally see at this time of year. And that makes it really problematic for fish, for insects, for all of the wildlife that relies on that water.
And I'm sure many people listening will be perhaps most concerned about their own water supplies. You mentioned potential disruption there. I mean, are there ways of avoiding that? Or do you think we could be seeing the sorts of situations that we've seen, for example, around the Tunbridge Wells area, where there has been disruption to domestic supplies?
It's a big concern, and one of the key solutions that water companies have to kind of manage these impacts is one that you've mentioned already, those temporary use bans. So we've got about 40% of the population across England coming under these hosepipe bans at the moment. And those mean that you can't use a hosepipe or a sprinkler connected to the main supply to do things like water your garden, wash your cars, clean patios, fill swimming pools. Now, one of the reasons that water companies have this option available to them is because it does really help us to reduce water demand and make those supplies last longer. So what we're seeing at the moment across the country is that reservoir levels are below normal, not catastrophically so, but it could get worse as time goes on. River levels are below normal. So in order to try and make those supplies last a bit longer, we can use those hosepipe bans to help us save water in the meantime. And of course, that's something that anyone can do, whether they're in an area with a hosepipe ban or not, is they can be more careful with their water use to help those supplies last a bit longer. And of course, the more we take out of the environment, the more water we're using as a society, the less is available for nature. So this is really helping our wildlife to withstand these dry conditions.
Ali Morse, Water Policy Manager at the Wildlife Trust. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. James says 1 trillion litres of treated water are lost every year through broken and leaking pipes in England and Wales. Water companies are to blame, well, at least partly. Thanks for that, James.
Now, firefighters in Suffolk are trying to contain a large wildfire. Homes and a caravan park have been evacuated. Of course, part of the cause is that everything is so dry. Drought has now been declared across more than half of England. Environmental campaigners say the crisis also raises serious questions about how much water private companies are allowed to take from rivers. Amy Fairman is head of campaigns at River Action. Morning, Amy.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. Drought has been declared across more than half of England. What does that tell us about the resilience of our water system?
Well, it tells us that we're not particularly resilient, doesn't it? Earlier this year we had floods and heavy rainfall, and now we're experiencing drought, and it shows us that we can't maintain, we can't capture the water when we're in abundance and use it when we're in shortage. We haven't seen reservoirs built in this country, any new reservoirs built in this country for over 30 years, and we're licensing up to 43 trillion litres to be extracted by industry every year. So we need to really face this issue head on and really look at how we're going to become more resilient in our water security as we face a more intense climate future.
In terms of that resilience, what can it look like, and how quickly can it look like the ideal?
Well, look, we need to look at, like I said, we need to look at how we store water, how we capture water within the landscapes, how we reinstate wetlands and reed beds, etc. We need to look at how we're using water, both at a household level, at an industrial level, and how water industry, we're seeing fresh water leaked from our pipes from our water industry. Billions of litres leaked out every day. So we need to look at the whole picture of what's happening with our water and make sure that every drop matters. And we need to face this issue pretty quickly if we're going to, our demand on water is going to increase because of population size. We've got, we're using AI ever more intensely. Data centers use extremely high intensity volumes of water for cooling, and we need to have an action plan and a national water resilience plan put in place by the Andy Burnham government extremely soon if we're going to become more water resilient.
Do you feel like it sounds pretty galling when we talk about our own personal use of water at home in the same sort of conversation as water companies leaking billions of litres of water all over the place? I find it difficult to come to terms with the personal responsibility argument in light of how big companies currently mismanage water.
Absolutely. We need to look at that picture, and we need to urgently invest in, we need to make sure that we have a water system where investment is actually ploughed into the water industry rather than being extracted by private equity firms internationally. We need to make sure all of our water company bills goes towards fixing these problems, as well as taking responsibility in our homes and reviewing the extraction licenses that are allowing non-essential services to potentially extract water, trillions of water every year. So we need to look at the systematic change, and look at the whole system and how we can adapt to a more more intense future.
Yeah, you said abstraction licenses there, did you? Help us understand what they are, Amy. What is an abstraction license?
So an abstraction license is a license that's awarded to a business to take water from the water environment, from rivers and lakes, to undertake their business. So we've been doing some analysis lately where we've seen over 400 golf courses licensed to abstract 8.8 billion litres of water a year. We've got 500 data centres at the moment. Abstracting billions of litres of licensed water a year. Licensed to abstract, that's not necessarily what they actually abstract, just to be clear, but licensed to abstract. So we need a review of those licenses to make sure that that they're fit for purpose, and that they're not outdated to a system that was not considering this water shortage future. So we need to review all those licenses to make sure they're fit for purpose, and not wasting water in non-essential ways.
Yeah, Amy, thank you very much. Good to speak to you this morning.
Thank you very much,
Amy Fairman there, who's head of campaigns at River Action. I think there is something difficult, isn't there, when you think, well, I would just like to turn my hose on and water the plants for 20 minutes of an evening.
I think your point about personal accountability in the light and in the face of companies taking massive profits with a system that has disintegrated over the years is very, very